Kirby crying about crowd noise is a terrible, terrible look. How to make some coffee. Make my coffee. Kirby crying about crowd noise in yesterday's game against Auburn. Now, I have several different things to say and points to make about this. First, just as a general point, I think it's a terrible look, a bad idea, bad look for any coach, really, to ever complain about his own fans. I'm not saying he doesn't have the right to do it. Of course he's got the right to do it. You have the right to say just about anything you want. Yeah, look at Dabo last year when the what was the thing? Tyler from Spartanburg or whoever it was called in and sort of ripped Dabo a new one and then hung up, and then Dabo went on to the tirade about it. I didn't think that was a good look for Dabo. Of course he had the right to do it. I just don't think it's a good look. Now, Tyler from Spartanburg probably shouldn't have called in. But anyway, you have to be very careful criticizing your own fans. You just have to be very careful criticizing your own fans. So just as a general rule of thumb, I think it's a bad idea for coaches to do that. That maybe there's an exception here or there we can find. Well, Tennessee fans throwing mustard bottles at Lane Kiffin. Okay, if the coach wants to come out and say, you know what, our fans shouldn't have done that, maybe that's an exception. But this is, for Kirby to do this, I think is ridiculous. So that's my first just general point. I don't like a coach complaining about his own fans. Now let's talk about specifically what he's complaining about in this case. Crowd noise at the game yesterday. Now, I'm old enough to remember when the Georgia-Auburn game was one of the biggest, best games of the year for Georgia, okay? The reality is that right now in the landscape of college football, that's just not the case. It's still an important game. It's a rivalry game. It's an SEC game, the Deep South's oldest rivalry. I actually didn't know. They mentioned this on game day yesterday. Georgia and Auburn have played the second most amount of times of any two teams in college football history. Who's played the most? Do you know? If you do, let me know down below. Let me know. Who knows? Who's played the most? Georgia and Auburn play second most. But anyway, now, I'm going to have to kind of go off on a side point and a tangent here in a way to kind of circle back to the point of the video, which is Kirby complaining about crowd noise at the game yesterday. First of all, if you're comparing it to the week before, where Georgia played on the road at Alabama, it's just apples and oranges. I understand the whole coach speak thing about how, oh, every game is a big game and every game is important and every game is tough and every game is hard. I understand that. And just look yesterday, Alabama loses to Vandy, Tennessee loses to Arkansas. I understand. I get that, okay? But the reality is, when you're a top 5 team and you're going into a game against an unranked opponent who's not any good, who you've beat 7 or 8 times in a row, the crowd, generally speaking, just isn't going to show up for a game like that with the same type of enthusiasm or whatever that they would with a quote-unquote bigger game. Kirby has to know that. Now, my bigger point and sort of goal... Is my coffee done? Yes. Good. Let's get some coffee. That's pretty good. My bigger point here, and this is something... there's a lot of things that come up that I find a way to tie this into, because it really is that big of a deal to me. If you want great home environments, if you want the crowd showing up for games, raucous and loud and creating the great home field advantage that you obviously seek when playing at home, there's only 2 ways to accomplish that. One of the 2 ways you have no control over, Kirby, or any head coach, and that's a big conference matchup that just happens to be scheduled, right? You take the game 2 years ago in Athens, Tennessee-Georgia game. Tennessee had beat Bama a couple of weeks prior, knocking Georgia out of the number 1 spot in the process, and Tennessee, of course, infamously became ranked number 1 for 1 week in November. And then the Georgia game happened in Athens. And I've talked to people who have been to hundreds and hundreds of Georgia games that were at that game, and they say it's the loudest they've ever heard it and nothing else is even close. Now, that type of game is what Bama had last week when Georgia came to town. You don't have any control or say-so over that as a head coach. Conference schedules usually come out years in advance. In this case, they came out about a year in advance because of realignment and expansion. But you don't have any control, generally, over how good or bad your conference opponents are going to be in a given year, or whether you happen to be playing them at home or at their place in a given year. Generally, you don't. So you don't need to manufacture some type of hype or crowd noise for a game like that, okay? You don't. So there's nothing Kirby can do about the fact that Auburn's terrible. Guess who Georgia's next home game is? Mississippi State. Do you think the crowd's going to be louder or less loud for Mississippi State next week than they were Auburn this past weekend? Less. Just less. Because of the opponent. Now, that's not Kirby's fault. That's no one's fault. That's Mississippi State's fault for not being any good. And it's not always just the teams you think it would be, right? A couple of years ago, Georgia hosted Arkansas. Arkansas was in the top 10. They had a really good team that year. They came in. The crowd was on fire, right? If Arkansas were to come here now, that just wouldn't be the case. Were to come to Athens, it wouldn't be the case because they're not that level of team this year. Those are things that are out of Kirby's control. He can't control how good or bad some other team is that happens to be on the schedule. But you know what he can control? Non-con games. You want good home field environments? You want the crowd to be loud and excited and to show up early and stay for the whole game and make a lot of noise and disrupt the opponent's timing and throw off their offense and their quarterback and make it hard for them to communicate? You want to do that? Play Clemson in Athens. Not in Atlanta. Not in Charlotte. Play Oregon in Athens. Not in Atlanta. This might blow your mind. Play Florida in Athens. I don't have any sympathy or nothing for a team and a coach, Georgia and Kirby, who force feed their fans puddles of piss for home games and then complain that they're not loud enough. Now, again, with the Auburn thing, Kirby can't control that, but that was Georgia's second home game of the year. Who was the first? Tennessee Tech. Why? Because we played Clemson on a neutral site. Now, I don't know if you're living under a rock. Kirby has final say-so on any decision that happens when it comes to Georgia football, period, end of story. You can like it, you can not like it, you can agree with it, you can disagree with it. That's the reality. If Kirby would have said, no, we're not playing Clemson in a neutral site, the game would not have been scheduled in a neutral site. Ask you, what sense did it make for Georgia to schedule a 2-game series with Clemson where neither of the games were on one of the team's campus? Both of them were neutral. Do you really think that Georgia needs to play a neutral site game in Atlanta for media attention or for marketing or for recruiting purposes? No. You know who needs to do that? South Carolina. And there's no shade at South Carolina. Middle tier programs need the exposure, maybe, that comes along with playing in a neutral site game out of your typical market. But in Georgia's case, playing in Atlanta every other week, do you really think there's a whole bunch of people or media members or recruits in or around Atlanta that doesn't know anything about Georgia's football program? But nope, got to play Clemson there. And played them in Charlotte 2 years ago. Played them. All right, sorry. Yeah, that was housekeeping. No, I don't need anything. I keep my room clean. I don't need housekeeping. But you have to schedule the game in Charlotte and Atlanta for no reason. None. Zero. Why? So you then can cry that the fans aren't loud enough for Tennessee Tech 3 weeks ago? Come on. I'm sorry. I don't have any sympathy for that. I don't. None. Stop doing that. Neutral site games are ridiculous. Why is the idea that college football games should be played on college campuses such a strange idea to some people. I don't get it. The Georgia-Florida game is another one. Now, this one kind of falls in the middle because it's a conference game. So Kirby has no say-so over whether or not the game is scheduled, right? Just like, Kirby doesn't control the conference schedule. I'm assuming everybody that's a college football fan knows how conference schedules work. Conference schedules are made by the conference, not by the individual schools. And then the schools themselves schedule the non-conference games. So Florida's a conference game. So the conference schedules that every year. But Georgia and Florida are the ones that decide to play this thing in a neutral site. And look, I've been to the game in Jacksonville. Yeah, it's fun. You know why it's fun? It's just fun because it's something different. There's nothing special about Jacksonville. There's just not. I'm not saying it's a bad city. I like Jacksonville. But that game, playing it in Jacksonville is no different than playing it in Atlanta or Charlotte or on the moon or anywhere else. There's nothing specifically about Jacksonville that says, oh, got to keep that game there. And look, to the traditionalists, and I am a traditionalist. In fact, I'm such a traditionalist that I remember when all college football games were played on college campuses, and that's where the Georgia-Florida game needs to be. Now, you look at Georgia's home schedule this year, and other than Tennessee, there's not a single team on there that's probably going to have a winning record. Tennessee Tech? No. Auburn? No. Mississippi State coming up this week? No. The next home game, so Georgia plays Mississippi State at home this week. They don't play another home game till the middle of November. The middle of November. And it's Tennessee. And then they have a home game against UMass. UMass. But the crowd's not loud enough. But Florida game will be in Jacksonville again, not in Athens, not in Gainesville. The Clemson game, nope, can't play that in Gainesville. Do I need to look at the schedule? I guarantee you they've got another 5 or 6 of these pointless neutral site beginning of the season games scheduled for no particular reason. It's dumb. It's dumb. It's been dumb. It's always been dumb. It's always going to be dumb. There's not a benefit. There's no benefit. Oh, they make more money. Georgia don't need no fucking money. They make more money playing the game in Jacksonville. Oh, well, just stop. Stop it. Stop. Well, how much money do you think Georgia makes in a home game? Come on, man. Come on, they selling Cokes for $12 a piece just like everybody else is. And besides that, if it's not about the money, if it's about creating great home environments, then why does Kirby have some sort of weird, sick fetish with neutral site games? And I know Kirby has made comments in the past about trying to get the Georgia-Florida game out of Jacksonville. If he really wanted it out of there, it'd be out of there. It's that simple. It's that simple. If Kirby really wanted the Georgia-Florida game out of Jacksonville, it'd be out of there. So I don't have patience for any coach criticizing their own fans. I think 99% of the time that a coach criticizes its own fans, it's a bad idea. There may be that 1% where, you got fans maybe in the crowd that are doing something they shouldn't be doing, and a coach gets asked about it, and so he has to criticize like a specific action by a specific fan or group of fans. Maybe that's one thing. But just this blanket, our fans ain't loud enough. After you move all the big games out of Athens every year, I ain't trying to hear it. I'm not trying to hear that. Sorry. I said the same thing about Nick Saban. Nick Saban did this several years back. Remember? Complaining about the Alabama fans? And I said the same thing then. Nick Saban was complaining that fans were leaving the game at halftime when they were beating fucking Furman 50-0 in the second quarter, and the fans are leaving, and Nick Saban complains about it. Don't schedule Furman, dumbass. You think if you would have scheduled Southern Cal or Ohio State or Michigan or Penn State or Florida State or Clemson or Miami or pretty much anybody with a pulse or a heartbeat that those fans would have left in the second quarter? No, they'd have been there the whole game. You want fans to come out and yell and get excited, you got to give them something to be excited about. Never mind the fact that Georgia's offense is like watching water turn to ice slowly over time. It's boring. There's nothing exciting about Georgia right now. Nothing. Georgia's a really good team. I'm not knocking them and saying they're going 6-6. Georgia's a really good team, but there's no superstars on the team. And look, this isn't a complaint about Georgia as a team. This is just what is it that you think fans are coming out to see? I don't know. I don't know. I don't like it. Stop crying about the fans and have a good morning.